The focus today is 1931 film Little Caesar, a classic, very well made. Of course, it's not normally to our taste in cinema, but a masterpiece for the time. Great photography by one of the pioneers of the art of photography, Tony Gaudio, who was born in Italy, in Apulia, to a family of photographers, moved to Rome, moved to Turin, which was the place for the cinema industry in Italy, eventually got to New York and then to California and Hollywood. Altogether, apparently, did photography on 1,000 films and got a couple of Oscars. This film itself only got one Oscar nomination for adapted screenplay, didn't get the Oscar. A lot of people at the time thought that the main actor, Edward G. Robinson, should have gotten an Oscar. And as you can see from the shot of the title, behind you see the cover of a novel, and in here as well you have First National Pictures, which was the production house, the distribution was Warner Brothers, presents Little Caesar, novel by William R. Burnett. It's important to consider this because it frames the story as literature. Now, the novel is simply commercial entertainment, hardcore crime literature, very tight, very quick, with violence, right? But on one hand, they probably included the reference to the novel because the novel, which came out in 1929, was a best-selling novel. The author was young, in his 30s. The director of this film, Mervyn LeRoy, was in his early 30s himself. And also, the idea that there is literature behind reinforces the assumption that there is a moral lesson, that there is something to learn from this, that it isn't just a docudrama, because a lot of films during that period were inspired by crime in the news. This is different. And it keeps a certain literary flavor in that all the scenes have some symbolic significance in the development of the arc of the characters. They can be defined as tableaus, meaning that they have all the elements that pertain to the story, the whole story, not just the scene. To follow after this, in the film, you see a frame of another intertitle. These frames with text can be called that way, with a reference to the Bible, right? Which is just a continuation of the theme that I introduced earlier. For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. So this is a parable about violence. Violent men will meet their demise, their punishment, and this is the arc of the protagonist, Cesare Enrico, nicknamed Rico Bandello, also known as Little Caesar. And behind most of these characters, there are some references to existing characters, right? We're in Chicago, so there are indirect references to Al Capone as well as to the corrupt mayor of Chicago from that period that was doing a lot of business with the mafia and getting bribes from different crime organizations. At the beginning of the film, the first scene, we see the two friends, small criminals, robbing a gas station, and then it's a small robbery, clearly, and then after that they go to a diner for a dinner of crime, of spaghetti and coffee, which in itself, to the eyes of an Italian, is a small crime. Spaghetti and coffee at midnight. But if it suits you, that's fine. So you can see that their lifestyle is not great. And in fact, in this diner, they talk about the future and how they can change their lives. In particular, Rico finds there a newspaper and reads on the first page this article that is shown on the screen: Underworld pays respect to Diamond Pete, Montana. And so they get into the idea that they can move to Chicago and go work for an organized crime family in Chicago. Rico claims that his life is small only because he never got his chance. And why did he deserve a chance? What are the skills upon which he's basing his dreams of a grandiose life, a life with better rewards to criminal activities? His ability to resort to violence, his courage, right? His lack of fear. And this is his gospel. Shoot first and argue afterwards. And this is what you will see the character do, the way he will act throughout the entire film. So keep in mind that even though there are plenty of references, visual references, and references of contents to The Godfather, Coppola clearly was in some ways inspired by this film. As I said, a classic of the crime genre. At the same time, Rico is extremely different from somebody like Michael. He is first and foremost somebody who's violent, who doesn't think much before he shoots. So this idea, shoot first and blank afterwards, pretty much sums up the character. It can be shoot first and think about the consequences afterwards, when it's too late, for example. Okay? So this is Rico, this is his friend Joe Massara, called Joey. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was the actor, and clearly this is a different character. Rico is violent by nature, and he will take every opportunity coming his way to grow, advance his criminal career. He will not take an opportunity to withdraw from that kind of life, to repent. In Joe, there is good and bad. Clearly, Joe was swayed into a criminal life by his frequentation of Rico. So Rico is to him what bad friends do to your life. But he still has a desire to embrace a regular life and an alternative career, which, believe it or not, is dancing. Okay? And so they talk, they have this conversation. This is the setup to the story, the scene in the diner. It's interesting that they use the word game, right? Which is part of the lore for these films and The Godfather as well. This idea that once you enter the criminal world, then you have to play by their rules. You're part of the game, and your options are therefore limited. Okay? There are things you cannot do, such as withdraw from the game without consequences. And this is instead Joey's dream, to get opportunities through criminal activities, but then quit and go back to regular life. Okay? So find his way into regular society in a less conventional way. And when he's mentioning his attempt at a career in dancing, he clearly indicates that Rico is responsible for getting him into crime, right? Dancing like I used to before I met you. And then he will meet a positive mentor, a positive inspiration character, which will be Olga. another dancer. And Olga, through the film, scene by scene, when the two of them appear, manages to take Joe into regular society, making an honest guy out of him. Okay, so you have a negative relationship, a positive relationship, the good life, the bad life, a lot of the elements that you find in The Godfather, but with a moralistic framework instead of a Machiavellian framework, although there are elements of Machiavellianism in this as well. Right? This is another statement that sums up the ideology of the character of Rico. He wants to have his own way or nothing. He wants to be somebody. Your own way or nothing means to be in control. And be somebody means to gain respect and visibility, though, which is interesting because usually in most films, big criminal leaders don't want to have visibility because visibility is a double-edged sword. Right? And there will be another character, Diamond Pete, who will admonish him for seeking visibility. But he wants others to tell him that he is great, right? So, next scene, these frames represent every scene in the movie. The movie is pretty tight, quick-paced, only about 75 minutes. So they go, but you only see, you mostly see Rico. They go see this mafia capo in Chicago at a club called Palermo, which is Bailey's, his headquarters. This is Sam Vettori, and he wants to get gain an entrance into his gang by saying that he's courageous, that he has guts, right? There is nothing soft about me. This is Rico talking to Sam Vettori to get hired, to get picked by him. Nothing yellow, where yellow is the label used through the 1930s in Hollywood, in plenty of films, to indicate fear, right? To be yellow means to be afraid, okay? And that's not Rico, but the fact that he's not yellow, that he's always determined into committing crimes, also means that he's unrepentant, right? That there is no salvation for him. He gets introduced to the gang. This is the rest of the gang. Next scene, we are at the Bronze Peacock, which is an establishment where you can have dinner, there are parties there is dancing, and here you see that Joe has already embraced his career of dancing. And this is Joe dancing with Olga, and this is his trial, and then after the scene he will get hired by this establishment for about $100 per week, so becoming an honest man. At the same time, Joe is still involved with Sam Vettori's gang alongside Rico. Okay, so keep this in mind. And there is time between the previous scene and this scene. You must imagine weeks or months that have gone by. Okay, great sets, great scenes. The furniture is very interesting in here. Overall, the film was cheaply made, didn't cost much, and made about 3 times what it cost, which for the standards of the time made him a success. And here you have the manager of the place talking to the maitre, and he's saying Olga, the female dancer, brought him, Joe Massara, around a few days ago, where you see that Olga is taking the place of Rico in Joe's life, taking him places, right? Joe took him into a life of crime. Rico took Joe into a life of crime. Rico took Joe from this small town to Chicago and into Sam Vettori's gang. Now Olga is taking Joe into a different place and a different lifestyle. In the next scene, you see the dressing room of Olga. It's an incredible dressing room. There is a certain grandiosity to the scenes in these films from the early 1930s. For one thing, the ceilings are the tallest. Of course, there is no ceiling because it's a studio. It's always a studio. But the impression is that you are in a room with, I don't know, 10, 15 feet tall ceilings. But have you ever seen a dressing room this big for somebody who's just dancing numbers in a nightclub in Chicago? So you see them talk, right? And she's saying, it's you and me from now on. So she's trying to replace Rico as the person who has influence over the direction of life for Joe, for the character of Joe. And she wants their relationship to be serious, to be a permanent, a long-term relationship. But then, while she's hugging him, she feels something here. And guess what? It's a gun. It's a handgun, right? So this way, she understands in a way that is visual, that can be placed on the screen for the viewers, that is involved with a gang. And he wants to take him out of there, right? Couldn't you leave it, right? Just quit that life and become what you're meant to be, a dancer, a husband, a father. But he says, he talks about the game, right? Once you're in a gang, you cannot exit unless you're dead, right? So you know that he would like to. You know that there is something good that is pulled, that is torn between the life of crime and a life of positive values. Next scene, we are in a gambling house with another small couple in Chicago called Arnie. And there is a meeting in Arnie's office. And once again, what identifies the success of these mafia bosses? The same luxury items, the same luxurious architecture that you would find in an upper class house in America during the 1920s and 30s. Think of the villas you find around Oyster Bay, the Vanderbilts, etc., and the furniture, the rooms you find there. But again, see the giant fireplace, the paintings, the chandeliers. This is San Vittore, this is Rico. There is Arnie in there. They're waiting for the next level boss, which is Diamond Pete. Diamond Pete comes in, and all of these scenes are theatricals. They start with a character, they start moving in the scene. The movement, the narrative movement starts with the character entering the room or exiting the room. Once the characters are in the room, they tend to take and hold their place. They don't move a lot, and their body doesn't move a lot. This is typical of the films of this period before you find actors such as Humphrey Bogart, for example, who has a more nervous kind of performance. And also, when you see the movie, see what Tony Gaudio and Mervyn LeRoy, the director and the photographer, did with the framing. Because you often have, when there is a moment of tension, the camera doesn't move. The camera keeps on the characters to exploit all the tensions. And as you can see, the frames is more squarish. The ratio for these films is not, or it's just not 16:9, or even 4:3, is 137:1, which means 4:3 and something. Okay, so a narrower frame, and you can see how they try to emphasize and develop the tension within the frame by keeping the characters in the frame with closer shots. And when there is movement, when the camera follows characters, there is meaning to that as well. So Diamond Pete comes in to say that there is a new commissioner in town, and their political connection, which is Big Boy, which is probably the mayor of the city, although they don't tell you in the film, but people would have probably recognized the situation from reading it in the news. It is saying, we have an order from Big Boy to lay low for a while. Yes, you can go on robbing, protection racket, but no shootings, right? Careful with that kind of crimes. Before this can happen, Rico who is in fact somebody who's eager to use his weapon, is thrown out of the room, okay, which is symbolic, significant. And also because the people in the room are more or less at a higher level. So no shooting, then Pete comes out and scolds Rico, saying, "Be careful with that cannon of yours." He knows he is a hot-headed guy, and you see how this is framed, the position of Rico, everything very intentional in this conflict, this psychological conflict at this point. But when they have that confrontation, everything that Rico sees, and you have the close shot, is the jewelry on Pete. Because he's described as a very simple character, right? He wants to have power through criminal activities because that's the only kind of skill that will get him there. But he just wants what upper class people would want. Nice clothes, a nice house, nice jewelry, okay? In a way, his mind is like the mind of a kid, right? And he's fascinated by these things, right? There's the shiny jewel ring on Pete's hands. Look at the size of the fingers on Pete's hands, of course, because there is also an ethnic representation at work in here. Every time they move from one location to another, they show you the location very simply and clearly. So, for example, they will show you the sign outside the Club Palermo where Salvatore operates, where his office is, so that you know where we are going. And they constantly use dissolve. So where they overlap images, they keep the sign while they add it into the film, the office. So you can see both, you know for sure that this is a place inside Club Palermo, right? First the sign, then the overlap, and then you move to the actual office. And now, again, this is, they don't even tell you, but this is weeks or months later, and now Salvatore is planning to rob Arnie's place, which is also the place where Joe is dancing. Joe and Olga are working there, right? So of course they know that they have to be careful not to use guns or kill people. And there is another character, there is a second character who has good and bad in him, and that is Tony Antonio, Italian-American, who already in here says, "I couldn't sleep last night." So he's not just afraid, but he has something going on inside, right? He's thinking about it, and it doesn't feel that it's something that should be done, right? And next to him instead you see Otero, and Otero is a killer, cold-blooded killer. And there is a confrontation there are a series of confrontations between Rico and Salvatore, for example, about Joe, because Joe is not there for the meeting. And Rico is trying to defend Joe because he's the best frontman in the world, exactly because he is honest looking. He can be used in robberies such as this one, for example. In this case, Joe will grant them access into the place, right? Because Joe, working there, is known by the people at the door, so he can vouch for the group that is coming, saying, "Let them in." There is another confrontation about who's in charge of the planning, and Salvatore says, I'm the planner, and trying to get Rico to stay out of this as much as possible. So Rico goes out of the room where he has a brief dialogue with Joe. Joe says, "I was busy, I'm late because I was busy," because he was working, he was dancing, right? He has a regular life now. And look at the face of Rico, how surprised he is. And of course, Joe's first reaction is, "I don't want to help you with this robbery. This is the place where I'm working. This is my life, the primary side of my life. And Rico's insisting, we need you exactly because you're well known in that establishment and you need to get us through the doors, right? And again, you find a theme that you will find through the Godfather trilogy, getting out, right? Getting out of a criminal life. And this is Joe's dream, but never Rico's dream until it is too late. And of course, Rico cannot understand this at all because that's the opposite. He tries, they go back in, Rico defends Joe, and again, Rico and Sam Vettori fight over the leadership for this particular robbery. You know how this is going to end. And once again, in terms of secondary characters, you find Antonio, the good/bad guy, who's afraid, right? He would like to get out probably. Very worried with the calm demeanor and the cynicism of Otero, the killer, who will remain like that to the very end. And of course, he will die, right, as well, because that's the end you plan for such characters. Next scene, and you see the overlap that is all in here as well. We're at the nightclub, the Bronze Peacock, and they're celebrating. It's December 31st, so they'll have more money, right, more customers. That's the ideal time to plan a robbery there. Unfortunately, something happens, something that Rico cannot control, okay? And this is how it goes. Be careful to notice how this is tied to what will happen next. Arnie, the owner of the gambling establishment, but also the owner of this establishment, is there to celebrate, and he sees in the room, among the customers at a table, the big-time commissioner, the new commissioner, Alvin McClure. So he wants to be introduced. He wants to connect with him. Sends the boss, the manager of the place, to talk to the commissioner, right? But the commissioner not only says, no, I don't want to talk to Arnie because the commissioner knows that Arnie is a criminal. But he is so appalled by the request and so surprised to learn that he is in the same room with criminal capos that the commissioner decides to leave the room. And this is how and why things go wrong. Because, of course, let me guide you through what happens in the meantime. We find in the next short scene the dressing room again with Joe and Olga, and Joe has to find an excuse to go out and open the door for his accomplices, for his gang members. And there you see the camera following him through the whole room and the entrance, all the way to the door. Why? Because you have to be thinking, especially looking at his face, is not very into it, that at any time he might decide to stop and not help and stop this from happening, right? This could be a turning point for him, a point where this moral decision might have a consequence on the lives of several people, including himself. But he goes there, it's midnight, he opens the door, he gets the people in, and of course you have Rico coming in like an animal with this determination in his life, in his face. He got the part because he had played a gangster on Broadway in a play, very successful play in 1927. And he enters the place and robs the place at the same time that the commissioner is leaving, because he has learned that Arnie is there. And therefore, the commissioner gets shot by Rico. And you see how this lack of complete control means that you cannot be successful at a life of crime. The crime doesn't pay, right? It doesn't matter how good or courageous you are. And that's the moralistic view, right? The commissioner gets shot. Not only a violation of the rule, try not to do shootings, but they shoot the commissioner. So the biggest possible scandal, the largest amount of heat to be brought onto criminal organizations, right? And of course, Joe is floored by this, and you see the dissolve with the outside, because of course Rico and his gang will come out where a car is waiting. Who's driving that car? Tony. But Tony is not into this at all. In fact, he's grinding the gears to start the car, and Rico will scold him, saying, "Well, what's the matter, Tony? Losing your nerve? Come on, this is not a picnic. Go on, get going." But you know where this is going. Joe comes back into the dressing room, has to confess to Olga what was going on earlier, right? She has heard the commotion and probably the shots, and she understands right away that it's connected to this, that she knows it was you. She goes straight to his heart. And then he says, "I cannot do anything about this," because she would like to make this right. And once again, they talk about the fact that he's into this criminal lifestyle and there is no turning back. But there will be. And again, we go back to the club, right? You can see, as I said, this kind of frame is used all the time. And Rico and his accomplices are there with the money. But he has to tell Vittori, "I had to take care of a guy, not a guy. He actually killed the commissioner." So they're not happy about it. This is Tony crashing the car. He just has to abandon the car somewhere where it will not be found, and instead he crashes nearby. Okay, so he's doing things that shouldn't be doing because he's so taken by remorse and fear about the consequences, right? And we go back to the club where Sam Vittori is complaining about Rico's eagerness to use the gun, and the police comes, right? Look at the guy's face, because the police is there, so he's already thinking, we're going to get arrested. This is not the policeman, right? This is the door into Sam Vittori's office, so this is another accomplice. And so Rico with the money will go into a separate room, kind of a closet behind a wall, and they're already saying, "We're okay as long as Tony is not arrested, doesn't confess." They're afraid of that. The police comes in, they think they're responsible, but they cannot do anything about it. And Tony, and Rico says, "Well, I have to take care of Tony." And also at this point, he asserts his superiority over Vittori. He'll decide who gets a share of the money, and he's not taking order from him. The gang gets on Rico's side for this, and Rico gets to use one of the sentences you find 3 or 4 times in here. "You're through." And meaning, you're the next that is eliminated, the next on my way to the next level, right? "You're through." He'll be saying that to different couples through the film. Tony goes home to find and talk to his mother. So you find this domestic side to the life of criminals, which will be developed later on, right? And comfort food is a staple in Italian culture, so mother says, "I'll have some spaghetti." Notice that they're very ethnic and limited in their stereotyping of ethnicity. It's already the second time Italians only eat spaghetti in this film, apparently. And he's very nervous. He would like to find peace. He's thinking about his past, his childhood. He, like Joe, is someone who grew from a life where he was a good guy and was taken by bad company into a life of crime, right? His mother says, You used to be a good boy, Antonio. You used to go to church, serve at the altar, right? Sing. And because of this, Antonio gets into his mind that he'll go to see the priest. Okay? The novel has all these elements. They're just a bit different. In the novel, Tony gets out and he walks into the priest and they have a conversation. But on his way to the church, poor Tony meets none other than Otero. And you see the difference in the faces, right? A criminal with no remorse and somebody who would like to get out of crime, of the lifestyle of the criminals. So Otero understands what is going on, right? He goes back to tell Rico, who is having lunch, that Tony has gotten crazy and is about to confess. So they both drive to the church, and before Tony can talk to the priest, he's killed on the steps of the church. And then they have a big funeral to honor Tony's memory. Think of the flowers in A Bronx Tale. The element of the flowers, the overwhelming amount of flowers, is already in Little Caesar. Okay? A lot of the elements in this film will inspire future directors. We go back to the club where there is a celebration. So finally, there is a public recognition of the power now held by Rico. But as I said, what's interesting from the point of view of the ethnic view of the Italian Americans is that, yes, they're dressed up. It's a formal event. But then when different guys try to talk to honor Rico, you can see that they're completely ignorant, that they're not able to say, to deliver a speech of any formality, right? Because not only they don't have the education, but the assumption is that they don't have the brains also for this kind of things. They give him a watch, a pocket watch, which of course is stolen. We learn later Pete is there, but Pete doesn't want to get a picture in the newspaper. Rico does. And who's not there? Joe is not there. So Rico is not too happy about that. The police will visit them because you need to know that they're never at peace. They're always under the eye of the police. They can never fully enjoy. And there are consequences to visibility. Pete told him not to get photographed. He gets into the newspaper and Arnie reads about this success. The recognition of Rico in the newspaper decides that it's time to put a stop to Rico's career before Rico does the same to him. But remember how Arnie also owns the establishment where Joe Massara is dancing. So that's where this scene takes place. Therefore, Joe overhears Arnie's plan to kill Rico, and he takes on the phone, calls the guys, but the guys know. Otero learns that Rico is the target of a murder attempt, but Rico is out. Rico is out because he's too vain, therefore he's out to buy the newspapers and get as many newspapers as possible to show people that he's become somebody. And while he is out, before they can warn him, he gets shot by a van with a machine gun, but he's only grazed by a bullet. So is likely wounded. He comes back, learns that Arnie ordered this hit on him and that Joe helped him. They go visit Arnie. Again, look, great photography for the time, right? Tony Gaudio worked a lot, not only with the frames, but with the lights, and used different kind of light bulbs and arrangements of light bulbs to get effects. So you can see the face of the person on the other side so nitidly coming out of this hole. So he goes to see Arnie, doesn't kill Arnie, says, you have to disappear. And next we read an article where Arnie, who officially is a businessman, have left Chicago to go to Detroit. At this point, though, you see the house of Rico is still living in an attic, in an apartment under the roof. He's not living a very rich lifestyle. Otero is happy. Now, Otero is right-hand man, and they know they're on a career, on a path to greater success, because Rico has been invited by Big Boy, the mayor, their political connection, right? So he's dressing up, and next you will see the palace where Big Boy lives and works, right? Notice the furniture, it's like a royal palace. Notice the size of the furniture, the size of the doors. Of course, there are servants, etc. And he calls him Big Boy, right? As if important people could go by nicknames. Hi, Big Boy, okay? No, it doesn't work like that in Italian culture, right? And look, the Big Boy has this incredible painting, like 18th century France, right? It says that he paid $15,000 for it. So this is the aspiration of Rico, to live that kind of lifestyle. Of course, Big Boy says, you're going to take over Pete's territory. And the next scenes, again, we have to assume a few months later, now Rico himself has an incredible apartment. This time, though, the style is not Louis XIV. This time, the style is modernist style, with incredible, not only pieces of furniture, but the things on the walls, the things on the furniture, right? A lot of small details. So you can see that he has finally reached a level of success, that the level of success he desired, and he'll continue, right? The whole town, soon you'll be running the whole town, says Otero. He has a butler himself, and Joe comes in. Joe comes in because Joe has gotten away from him, but remember that Joe knows who killed the commissioner. And therefore, Rico says, you have to stick close to me. And Rico tells Joe, you have to be close to me, stay close to me, but he doesn't want to have any part of this, but the idea is still, once you're in a gang, you're in my gang, you have to stay there. And of course, Rico is very critical of the fact that his dancing calls him a sissy for dancing, a man dancing, and love, a man in love who lets love guide his decisions in life. He cannot accept that because Rico is a criminal through and through, a very devoted criminal. Interestingly, what we know about him is that he doesn't drink and is never depicted as a womanizer. He's like a professional at this, with a single mind, a single plan, to become a big couple. But Big Boy, while the conversation takes place in one room, Rico goes to the other room to take another phone call. Big Boy says, we have to get rid of Joe, because Joe knows who killed the commissioner, and they can both go down because of this. Meanwhile, Joe leaves before Rico comes back, goes to Olga's apartment, and his plan is to split, to go out of town with Olga. Olga, who's the positive influence, tells him he has to face consequences of his action. First she says, we've got to think, right? Then she says, you've got to confess to Flaherty. So you might go to prison because you were an accomplice to this heist, to this robbery, but once you go through that pain, that suffering, you'll be able to have a normal life. And so she goes into the other room. Notice the parallels between the previous scene and this scene. She goes into another room and locks the door. Joe's on the other side saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. She calls Flaherty, the policeman, to say, come here and Joe will talk to you and will tell you who killed the commissioner. And they go. We know that the police is coming, but when the doorbell rings, we think it's the police coming in. No, it's Rico and Otero. And, of course, this is the big final confrontation, right? You see the couple, you see their dreams about to be shattered, but this time, and you can see the incredible softness of the shot picked by Tony Gaudio, exactly for this frame. This time Rico goes yellow. He likes Joe too much, cannot find the strength to pull the trigger and kill his friend, right? And however, next is Otero, who pulls the gun and tries to shoot poor Joe. But because Rico is pushing back, saying, no, don't do it, Joe is only wounded. He's not killed by Otero. Otero and Rico escape through a window. The police comes in, and this is the test for Joe. Will Joe talk, confess, possibly go to prison, and then conduct a regular life? He does. He talks to the policeman. Now they have enough information. He orders everyone to be arrested. San Vittorio's gang. The police cars come out. Otero and Rico run on the streets. Otero gets shot. At Club Palermo, Vittori is arrested. Rico goes to his fans called Magdalena. It's not his mother, it's just a nickname. This is the woman, again, very ethnic representation of an Italian-American woman who gets the stolen goods from Rico in exchange for money. So he is there to get money, to escape, to run away, and the police goes there. They cannot find him because he's behind that shelf is a fake door, but he only gets $150. And as a consequence, months later, we see that he's in a flop house, a cheap place where you can get a bed. That's where we find Rico, right? That's the end and the opposite end of his career. Worse than when he started. Somebody in this scene is reading a newspaper saying that Little Caesar was never found months earlier after the shooting at Joe's house. But the article is also planting a seed for an action. Rico didn't have the nerve and he didn't have the brains. As a reaction, although he's crushed by life, Rico calls the police to say, how dare you say that I went yellow, right? And the police traced the call back. And therefore they send out a car. And notice how it's in front of a big board advertising a show with Olga and Joe. Because now Joe, months later, after paying his debt to society, is a star. He's been successful at redeeming himself, getting out of business, and Rico goes behind this board and they'll shoot him through. The Flaherty, the police sergeant, will take a machine gun, the Tommy gun of these that you find in all these films, and shoot a series of bullets through this entire baseboard, and the bullets will hit him. But it's very symbolic, right? And there is a moral lesson in here. So at the end, you see Rico dying, and his last line is straight from the novel. And the last line in the novel, he says, "Mercy, is this the end of Rico?" Talking about himself in third person and saying mercy in a true sense, right? He's only repenting at the very last moment, but it's too late. Again, you have a dissolve between him to contrast his ending with the future, the bright future of this couple. That's why they use dissolve in this way, and that's the very end. And that's where we go to the actual film to see a little bit of the beginning and a little bit from the end.